Thank you. Our next panelist is Christopher Fabian, who co-created and co-leads the UNICEF Innovation Unit. Its successes have been manifold, including getting Christopher listed as one of the 50 best inventions of 2011, which I assume means one of the best inventors, but it says inventions here. Thank you.
Hi, thanks. So I did a whole bunch of slides really fast yesterday morning, so I'm going to do no slides and go a little bit slower today, and try to hit the same note. So that's the problem with speaking more than one time. And the note is very important. The note is that we need to have this change, and we need to engage disenfranchised kids, and we need to do it in a way that's global, and we need to do it quickly. So the invention actually wasn't mine. It was something that our team built in Uganda, and it's a nice entry into what I wanted to talk about. The invention that was in Time magazine was called the digital drum. It's an oil drum. It's been repurposed as a rugged computer kiosk. It follows the same set of thinking as the hole-in-the-wall computing experiments. And we built this in the innovation lab in Uganda as a way to try to extend the reach, the access to learning in a country where 60% of teachers can't read a paragraph aloud in English, which is the main language of instruction. In a country where children graduate from secondary school and still need another 2 years of vocational school to become qualified for any skills that they would need to get a job. And in a country where people are not in school more than they are. And even if you are in school, you've got a teacher who's can't read in the language of instruction that you need to learn. So we built this digital drum. We took an oil barrel, which there are a lot of, and put a bunch of open source hardware in it and a bunch of open source software and a bunch of content. And in Uganda, you can now go to a youth center somewhere where there wasn't electricity 3 years ago, and you can have access to some of the best teachers in the country, their lessons. You can have access to most of Wikipedia, which is cached, and on this computer you have access to games, math games. Actually, the most popular piece of software on the digital drum, on this oil barrel that's bolted into a wall in a place that's running off a few solar panels, the most popular game is actually a math game called Tux Maths, where you get to play a penguin and shoot aliens. Okay. So that's an interesting story, because I was in Uganda about a month and a half ago, and I was in Karamoja in eastern Uganda, and Karamoja, under Idi Amin, who came and shot all the teachers publicly, shot a lot of the teachers publicly, and then there were no more teachers. Karamoja decided to bury the pen and pick up the sword. And so for decades, you had a group of people in Uganda who were opposed to education, to any education, especially to education for girls. And one of the things that UNICEF has been working on is to unbury so there's a ceremony that we do to unbury the pen, right, to bring education back and to make sure that everybody's in school in an area where there was no electricity, there was no Wi-Fi 5 years ago, one of the most difficult operating environments in the world. And so I was in Karamoja, and I've seen the work that our team is doing there, and it's actually we're looking at extending the reach of technology, but also extending the reach of learning. So this most recent visit, we didn't see the digital drum because that prototype is an old prototype, and we kind of try to build very quickly in our team and cycle through things. So the digital drum is no more, but we've got these small, low-powered computers that are in youth centers in Karamoja where there's internet being provided by UNICEF. We've got these Wi-Fi meshes spread over Moroto town and outside, and you have kids working on these computers and playing games. And I walked into a youth center, and there were 50 kids all crammed around these 3 low-power computers, learning, working with each other, collaborating. But there was a problem. So I'm going to tell this story and one other story, and then I'll give you 5 principles. And the problem with my talk is that I don't have an answer to this, but I think that following a smart process, can lead us to an answer. The problem was that in this youth center in Moroto, all of the kids who were crammed into it, working, playing on computers, were boys. And you'll find this if you go to an internet cafe somewhere, if you look at where people are engaging with technology, if you look at the hole-in-the-wall computers, and if you look at photos of what Dr. Sumatra Gupta has done, which is amazing, you find that it's boys, right? Boys are using them, and it's either because the girls are busy doing household chores, or because it's scary to be in a dark internet cafe with a bunch of boys, or because the boys push them away. And so that's a problem, right? And actually on that same trip, when I was driving to Moroto, we stopped by the side of the road, and there was a girl panning for gold on the side of the road. And I thought that this is kind of like a neat, I don't know, some weird romantic American notion of panning for gold and the gold rush. And there's nothing romantic at all about panning for gold. This girl was half naked in the dust by the side of the road with a bucket of mud. And we stopped the car and we went out and started talking to her. And I wasn't sure what language she would speak. I wasn't sure how she'd communicate with us, with the UNICEF group. Her English was fine. She was 16 years old. Her name was Lucy. half naked in the side of the road, panning for gold, panning for mud. And we said, how much money do you make doing this? And she said, I make between $4 and $10 a month. And we said, well, how is your English so good? And your Kiswahili is really good. And she said, well, I graduated from 6th grade. I'm now 16. I've been out of school for 3 years. I never went further than that, and I'm now panning for gold. And we said, well, what does gold look like? And she said, it looks like seashells. And there's no ocean around Karamoja. There's no big water source. She's never seen a seashell. But she went to enough school to learn that metaphor. And to me, this is a compounded problem, because you give somebody access to education and access to learning, but you don't give them access to opportunity, right? And without that access to opportunity, there is no access to choice. And you have somebody sitting by the side of the road, naked, panning for gold, doing one of the most demeaning jobs that you can do, who's qualified, who can use a metaphor to describe what she's doing, and we've given her nothing, right? And so to me, that's ultimate disenfranchisement. I don't have an answer of how you marry the first story with the second, but I think somewhere in the space between those two, we look at a future where you can provide meaningful access to opportunity, which is why a kid goes to school. You can get a kid into the school building, and that's kind of easy. But for them to learn, for them to pick something up, it needs to be relevant. And that's what I've seen in the last day and a half. The material has to be relevant, and a kid is not stupid. Right? A kid really knows what is relevant to them and what isn't, what will give them that access to opportunity, what will get them to not be by the side of the road digging for gold. And somehow there's a space between what we're providing and what's relevant. So those are the two stories. And then just very quickly, the things that we've learned in our team about how to build massive, scalable systems that can change things are that, as I said yesterday, it has to be built locally. We cannot solve Lucy's problems in Karamoja, in Moroto, from here. And so these are just things that I think we can talk about in the question and answer. The stuff has to be built there, which was why we're really excited with the Khan Academy Light collaboration and with them being in our innovation lab in Juba in South Sudan, building the next version of their platform. It has to be open source. This is super important in the education space too. We cannot build a system that pushes the same barriers and boundaries that we've been living with for the last 150 years in education. We can't create these closed curricula and these closed systems that don't give access to the people who need it most. It means we can't adapt something from one country and one context to another. It means that people who need it can't adapt it. And it means that we're creating firewalls and barriers that are just going to keep the same, right? We saw that nice exponential curve because it goes the other way too. It needs to be built with people who are using it, right? And these are kids. And I think that everybody in this room's pretty much convinced of that. I don't think we need to make that argument. But if we're building systems for young people to engage with mathematics or learning in new ways, we have to involve them with it. We have to be able to fail. The digital drum, this thing that's in Time magazine as one of the 50 best inventions of whatever, a few years ago, there are only 30 of those in existence. To me, that's a sort of type of failure, right? It didn't scale. We never had 100 million digital oil drums with ruggedized computer hardware in it. But it taught us a lot about how young people engage with technology in rural areas that have never had access to the internet before. It gave us a prototype. It gave us something we could learn from, and we're able to talk about it and move forward. It was actually the 4th version of that design, and we've now got some more things coming that help us learn from those failures. And then the last thing that we've learned is that if we don't build for scale, we're doing something wrong. And there's a huge difference in this space between doing a prototype of a project and doing a pilot, right? And if we're looking at educational pilots, we're wasting our time, because a pilot is immediately a bounded system where we have some expectation of its boundaries and where we know sort of where it starts and where it ends and how long it'll go for. A prototype, and when we're looking at prototyping these type of engagements with young people, is a system that's modular and open. It's a conceptual difference, and it lets us take the parts of it that work and move forward and scale it out nationally in a way that pilot doesn't, right? And so I would also just say that as we're thinking about how we move forward the agenda of learning and learning in the most difficult parts of the world, we think about how we can create systems that can go to scale, because it doesn't help if we increase access to learning, opportunity, and choice for 3 or 4% of people or for people in the top 3 quintiles. It has to be something that can start in the hardest places, scale out to the other ones, and create global change. So I don't, again, I'm sorry to end on a sort of sad and depressing note. I don't have an answer of how we get to the Lucys of the world, but I think that the discussion with everybody in this room today really starts to open up a space where we can get there. So thank you very much.